The golden afternoon sun shimmered over the garden as white roses swayed in the breeze. Guests laughed, cameras flashed, and a slow melody played as Rayan Malik slipped a diamond ring onto Isha's trembling finger. From the outside, they looked perfect, a beautiful couple finally sealing their love after years of struggle. Rayan, a 32-year-old businessman, had built everything from scratch. His wedding was more than a celebration. It was a statement that love could triumph over hardship. But Aisha's smile, though dazzling, carried a weight no one noticed, a secret she had buried deep. As they exchanged vows, her hands shook slightly. Maybe it was nerves, maybe guilt. Her best friend, Zara, noticed, frowning, but brushed it off. The guests cheered when Rayan kissed her forehead, unaware that beneath the romantic facade, a storm was quietly brewing, one that would erupt before the night ended. Hours later, as the reception continued, Rayan's cousin slipped him a phone. "You might want to see this," he whispered. Confused, Rayan took it and froze. On the screen were screenshots of messages, intimate photos, and one video clip that shattered everything he believed. It showed Aisha, just weeks ago, with another man, someone Rayan knew. The world seemed to tilt. The laughter around him grew distant, muffled by the roar in his ears. He excused himself, gripping the phone so hard his knuckles turned white. In the empty hallway, he replayed the messages again and again, disbelief turning into fury, love into venom. His bride had betrayed him, not before the wedding, not years ago, but during it, until the very last moment. Every "I love you" now felt like poison. When Aisha found him outside, his expression was unreadable. "Rayan," she whispered, brushing her veil aside. He looked at her as if she were a stranger. "Who is he?" he asked, his voice barely human. The color drained from her face. "It's not what you think," she tried to say, but her trembling voice gave her away. "Then what is it?" he demanded. The silence between them stretched, suffocating. Somewhere in the distance, fireworks lit up the night sky, bright, fleeting, and cruelly beautiful. Inside, guests toasted to eternal love. Outside, beneath those same stars, the seeds of tragedy had taken root. Rayan didn't know it yet, but by morning, one of them wouldn't be alive. The wedding that had begun with promises of forever would soon end with the sound of a scream and the stain of blood on white lace. The night grew heavier as the celebration dimmed. Rayan slipped away from the dance floor, the phone still burning in his palm. Every step echoed like a countdown to disaster. Inside, Aisha laughed nervously with her friends, pretending everything was fine, while guilt gnawed at her chest. She thought she'd buried her past, but fate had dug it up and thrown it in her husband's face. Rayan locked himself in a small lounge near the reception hall and opened the messages again. The man's name, Saad. Qureshi glared from the screen. Saad, his old friend. The same man who had helped him plan this very wedding. Betrayal had a familiar face now. The texts were intimate, recent, and undeniable. "I wish it was you I was marrying," Aisha had written just a week ago. Rayan's breath caught. His hands trembled as rage coursed through him. Meanwhile, Saad lingered near the bar, unaware that his secret was out. He raised a glass toward the happy couple's portrait, smirking faintly, perhaps remembering forbidden nights. But as his eyes scanned the room, he noticed Rayan was missing, and so was Isha. His smirk faded in the lounge. Aisha finally found the courage to face Rayan again. "Please, let me explain," she said softly. stepping closer. He stared at her like she was a stranger. "Explain what?" "That you loved him. That you married me for convenience." His voice cracked, but his anger didn't. Aisha's eyes welled up. "It ended before the wedding. I swear it meant nothing." "Then why are there messages from yesterday?" he snapped, throwing the phone onto the table. Her knees weakened. She didn't know Saad had texted her again. One last desperate message. "If he ever finds out, remember, you're not the only one with secrets." She'd deleted it, but not fast enough. Rayyan's world spun. The woman he loved had not only betrayed him, but with someone he trusted like a brother. His breathing grew ragged, his vision blurred with fury. "You made a fool of me in front of everyone," he said through clenched teeth. Aisha reached for his hand, tears spilling. "Rayyan, I never meant to hurt you. I was scared. He pulled away sharply. "Save your lies." His voice dropped, cold and final. Then he turned and walked out, leaving her shaking in the empty room. Outside, Saad stood alone near the parking area, lighting a cigarette. He didn't see Rayyan approach until it was too late. "You enjoyed the wedding?" Rayyan's tone was flat, unreadable. Saad froze, cigarette halfway to his lips. "Of course. It was beautiful," he said carefully. Rayyan's eyes glinted with something dark. "Then let's make sure it ends beautifully too." What happened next would remain a mystery to most. The security camera caught only flickers, 2 men in shadow, a sudden shove, and the sound of something metallic hitting the ground. Moments later, Rayyan returned to the hall, his expression calm but hollow. The groom had changed. The celebration had begun to fade, the music softening into a slow, dreamy tune. Most guests were either drunk or saying their goodbyes, unaware that the night was already stained with something darker than spilled wine. Rayyan walked back into the hall with the calmness of a man who had made a decision, the kind of calm that comes only before a storm. His eyes searched the room until they found Aisha standing alone by the wedding cake, her hands clutching the edge of the table as though it might keep her from falling apart when she saw him. Relief flickered in her eyes, but it was short. Rayyan's face gave nothing away. "Can we talk? Just us?" he asked quietly. His tone was gentle, almost tender, and that scared her more than his anger. They stepped into a side corridor that led to a private garden behind the venue, the place where they had taken their first wedding photos just hours earlier. The roses still glistened under the fairy lights, their scent too sweet for what was about to happen. Aisha turned to him, tears in her eyes. "Rayyan, please. I know you hate me right now, but it wasn't love with Saad. It was confusion, a mistake." Rayyan didn't answer. He stared at her the way a man stares at a photograph of someone he used to love, distant, hollow, mourning what's already gone. "You lied to me, Aisha," he said softly. "You stood beside me today, took vows, and all the while you belonged to someone else." Her voice broke. "I don't belong to anyone. I chose you, but did you?" He cut her off. His voice rose, echoing against the marble walls. "Did you ever choose me? Or was I just your second option when he wouldn't commit?" She tried to speak, but the words tangled in her throat. The silence stretched, filled only by the sound of wind rustling through the garden. Then she whispered, "I'm sorry." 2 words, fragile and meaningless in that moment. Rayyan took a step closer. "Sorry doesn't erase betrayal." His hand brushed against something cold in his pocket, the knife from the cake-cutting ceremony. the one the photographer had given him to hold earlier. He hadn't planned this, or maybe he had without realizing it. His mind screamed reason, but his heart shredded and raw. Whispered revenge. Aisha saw the shift in his eyes and backed away, her voice trembling. Rayan, please, think about what you're doing. He took another step. I am thinking, he said, his voice barely human. For the first time, I'm truly thinking. The music from inside swelled, a love song playing as though mocking them. In that surreal moment, Rayan raised the knife, his hand shaking. Aisha cried out, reaching for him, but the blade came down in one quick, desperate motion. The roses trembled as her scream tore through the night. When the noise died, the only thing left was silence, thick, suffocating, final. The white of her dress was no longer pure. Rayan dropped the knife, his hands trembling, staring at what he'd done as though waking from a nightmare. The fairy lights flickered, the wedding music still playing faintly from the hall, a twisted lullaby to the end of love. He fell to his knees beside her, whispering, "You said forever." But forever had already ended. The sun rose over Karachi, bathing the city in gold, but inside the Malik mansion, light only made the shadows longer. The wedding guests were gone, the laughter had faded, and all that remained was silence, the kind that screamed. Rayan sat alone in the guest room, still in his wedding suit, the collar undone and his hands shaking. He hadn't slept. He hadn't even moved much. His reflection in the mirror looked like a stranger, pale, hollow, and unrecognizable, somewhere inside the house. The police whispered. They had arrived just after dawn, alerted by a hotel staff member who'd found something in the garden that didn't belong there, a truth too heavy for one morning. Rayan barely heard their questions. He just stared at the table where Aisha's bridal jewelry lay scattered, catching the light like tiny ghosts. Detective SarahIqbal.com but Sharpad stepped into the room. "Mr. Malik," she said quietly, "I need you to tell me what happened last night." Her tone was polite but firm, the voice of someone used to peeling back layers of lies. Rayan blinked, struggling to form words. "It was supposed to be perfect," he whispered. "We were happy. She was happy." His voice cracked. "I didn't know she was hiding so much." Sarah studied him. "You discovered something about your wife." He hesitated, then nodded slightly. "Messages. A man she knew before. It broke me." His eyes drifted toward the window, where the garden shimmered under morning light. "I just wanted to talk," he added, "but everything got out of control." The detective exchanged a look with her partner. "Did you see this other man, Saad Qureshi, last night?" Rayan clenched his fists. "Yes, he was there." Sarah flipped through her notes. "He's missing this morning." That made Rayan's head snap up. "Missing," he repeated, startled. Sarah nodded. "His car is still in the parking lot. His phone's off. No one's seen him since last night." The words seemed to hang in the air like a curse. Rayan's mind spun. Had he gone too far? Did Saad run? Or had something else happened entirely? Outside, reporters had already begun circling like vultures, eager to devour another scandal. Businessman's wife found dead after wedding. Friend missing. The Malik family name was on every tongue. Rayan's mother wept quietly in the next room, whispering prayers that no one seemed to hear. Sarah turned back to him. "You're not under arrest," she said softly, "but I need you to stay close." Don't leave the city. He nodded numbly, every breath feeling heavier than the last. As the officers left, he sank onto the floor, his head in his hands. The reality began to sink in. Love had turned to tragedy, and he was standing at the center of it. Outside, the garden was cordoned off, white petals scattered on the grass like snow over a grave. The roses that had once symbolized love now whispered secrets to the wind, secrets that no one was ready to hear. And somewhere in that silence, Rayan thought he heard Aisha's voice again, faint, distant, and full of questions that would never be answered. Detective Sarah Iqbal stood in the Malik family's marble-floored living room, her notebook in hand. She'd seen dozens of cases, jealousy, betrayal, greed, but this one felt different. Every detail was too neat, too perfect, like a puzzle where one piece had been forced to fit. Outside, police tape fluttered in the wind, drawing curious neighbors who whispered theories. Inside, Rayan Malik sat on the sofa, motionless, his wedding ring glinting faintly under the chandelier. Sarah studied him. "You said you and your wife argued last night." Rayan nodded slowly. "Yes, we talked in the garden." "What about after?" His eyes darkened. "I don't remember much after that." It wasn't entirely a lie. His memory came in flashes, the confrontation, the rage, the sound of something breaking. He couldn't tell if what he remembered was real or just the mind trying to shield him from what he had done. Every minute that passed made it harder to tell the difference between guilt and grief. The doorbell rang, and an officer stepped in with a sealed evidence bag. Inside was Aisha's phone. Sarah took it carefully and began scrolling through the messages. Most were harmless wedding plans, family chats, until she found a contact saved under SQ. Her eyes narrowed. The last message, sent just hours before the wedding, read, "You're making a mistake. He doesn't know who you really are." Sarah looked up. "Who is SQ?" Rayan hesitated. "Saad Qureshi, my friend." She tilted her head. "The same friend who's missing." He swallowed hard. "Yes." Sarah motioned to her partner. "Get a search team for Qureshi's apartment. I want everything. Phones, laptops, security footage." Then she turned back to Rayan. "Did you know your wife met with him recently?" Rayan's face paled. "No. She told me she ended it months ago." Sarah's voice softened slightly. "Mr. Malik, I've seen this before. Affairs can twist people into things they never meant to be. But we need the truth. Every detail matters." Rayan looked at her, his voice breaking. "The truth is, I loved her. Whatever she did, I still loved her." The sincerity in his tone gave Sarah pause. She could see a man torn apart, but by guilt or heartbreak, she couldn't yet tell. An hour later, a call came through. The officer on the line spoke quickly. "Ma'am, we found Qureshi's car near Clifton Beach. There's blood inside, but no body." Sarah's pen froze midair. The case had just shifted from a crime of passion to something much deeper. She turned to Rayan. "We're going to need you to come with us." He stared at her blankly. "Am I under arrest?" "Not yet," she said. "But if you're lying, I'll know." As the detectives led him out, cameras flashed from every corner. Reporters shouted his name. Questions flew like bullets. "Did you kill your wife? Where is Saad?" Rayan said nothing. He walked past them like a ghost, lost between the man he once was and the monster the world now believed him to be. That night, Sarah sat at her desk, staring at the case files. Two people were gone. One man stood in the middle of it all, broken, silent, and maybe not as guilty as he seemed. Somewhere, hidden beneath all the lies, was a truth that refused to stay buried. Detective Sarah Iqbal's car sped through Karachi's early evening traffic, sirens slicing through the humid air. She wasn't heading home, she was heading to Saad Qureshi's apartment, a quiet building near Clifton, where the missing man supposedly lived alone. But as she climbed the narrow staircase and pushed open the door, she realized alone might not have been the right word. The apartment was clean to clean. Every book perfectly lined, every cushion placed just so. It didn't feel like a bachelor's place. It felt staged. On the coffee table sat a half-empty glass of wine beside a lipstick-stained cigarette butt. Sarah crouched down, studying it closely. "Aisha," she whispered under her breath. Rayan, sitting in a holding room miles away, had no idea what Sarah was uncovering. He sat with his head bowed, his mind looping through memories. Aisha's laughter, her secrets, her tears. Every detail that once felt precious now felt like a clue. Who was she, really? He muttered to himself, back at the apartment. Sarah's team discovered something hidden behind a loose panel near the bookshelf, a small safe. Inside, among a few documents and photographs, was a single USB drive. When they plugged it into a laptop, dozens of video files appeared, all labeled by dates. The latest one was from 3 days before the wedding. Sarah clicked play. The screen flickered to life, showing Aisha sitting on that same couch, her face pale, her voice shaking. "Saad, please stop recording this," she said. "I can't keep doing this. I told you, it's over." Saad's voice came from behind the camera, calm but menacing. "You think you can just marry him and pretend none of this happened? You owe me, Aisha." "I don't owe you anything," she snapped, tears welling up. "Yes, you do," he replied. "Because if Rayan ever finds out what we did, it won't just ruin your marriage, it'll destroy both of us." Sarah paused the video, frowning. The tone in Saad's voice wasn't romantic, it was threatening. It wasn't love. It was control. Suddenly, the story began to shift. What if Aisha hadn't betrayed Rayan out of passion, but out of fear? What if she had been trapped in something darker than anyone realized? Sarah leaned back in her chair, thinking fast. "Get me everything on Saad Qureshi," she told her partner. "Bank records, calls, anything that connects him to Aisha before the engagement." Meanwhile, Rayan's lawyer entered the interrogation room. "They're building a case," he said quietly. "They found something at Saad's place. I don't know what yet, but it could change everything." Rayan looked up, confusion clouding his face. "Change what? Whether you're seen as a murderer or a victim?" The city lights flickered outside as the night deepened. Sarah watched the video one more time, noticing something she hadn't before. In the corner of the screen, a faint reflection of another man watching from behind the curtain. Someone neither Saad nor Aisha had mentioned. She hit pause, zoomed in, and her eyes widened. This wasn't just a love triangle. It was a trap built by someone else entirely. And whoever that shadow was, he might be the real reason two people were now gone. Detective Sarah Iqbal replayed the video for the 3rd time, her eyes fixed on the faint reflection in the glass. The figure was barely visible, a man standing half-hidden behind the curtain, his outline blurred by dim light. But there was something unmistakable about the posture, the stillness. This wasn't someone accidentally caught on camera. This was someone watching, someone who knew. She called over her partner, Inspector Naveed. "Freeze this frame," she said. "Enhance the contrast." He did, and slowly the shape sharpened. Sarah's mind raced. Zoom in on that watch. A few minutes later, they compared it to a photo from the wedding. Rayyan's cousin, Adil Malik, wore the exact same model, a limited edition, Omega, gifted by Rayyan himself. Sarah leaned back, exhaling. So Adil was there that night, watching. Meanwhile, Rayyan sat in the interrogation room, unaware that the story was twisting again. His lawyer had stepped out to take a call, leaving him alone with his thoughts. His mind wandered back to Adil, his younger cousin, loyal on the surface but always hovering close to Aisha, always a little too helpful. There had been whispers in the family before the wedding, but Rayyan had dismissed them as jealousy. Now, doubt crept in like poison. At the same time, Sarah arrived at Adil's office downtown. The young man smiled when he saw her, overly calm. "Detective, I heard about the tragedy. Terrible, really. My cousin didn't deserve this." Sarah studied him. "You were close to both Rayyan and Aisha." He nodded. "Of course. I introduced them, actually." "Then you must know Saad Qureshi, too." Adil hesitated, just slightly. "Yes, but not well." Sarah noticed the flicker. "Strange," she said, "because your number appears in Saad's call log multiple times in the week before the wedding." Adil's smile froze. I was helping with the event arrangements." "Event arrangements?" Sarah raised an eyebrow. At midnight, the air shifted. Adil leaned back in his chair, his confidence slipping. "Detective, I think you're reading too much into things." "Maybe," Sarah said, standing up. "But we both know shadows don't appear in recordings, unless someone was standing there." She slid a still frame from the video across his desk, the blurry image of him behind the curtain. Adil's face drained of color. That night, Sarah drove back to headquarters, replaying every connection in her head. Adil and Saad had been in contact. Aisha had been frightened, possibly blackmailed. Rayyan had been pushed to the edge. What if the entire tragedy had been orchestrated, not by passion, but by manipulation? She stopped the car at a red light, her thoughts racing. If Adil had planned something, what was the motive? Money, jealousy, inheritance. Rayyan's company had recently expanded. Adil handled part of the finances. Could this have all been a setup to destroy Rayyan, emotionally and financially? Sarah pulled out her phone and called Naveed. "Check Adil Malik's bank accounts. Any unusual transfers before the wedding." "Got it," Naveed said. "And, Sarah, we just found something else in Qureshi's car. A small voice recorder. Label says wedding plan." Her pulse quickened. "Don't touch it," she said sharply. "I'm on my way." The night air outside was cool, but inside the detective's car, everything burned. Questions, suspicions, truths waiting to explode. Somewhere between love and hate, loyalty and betrayal, lay the real story of what happened that night. And the deeper Sarah dug, the clearer it became. The wedding hadn't just ended in tragedy. It had been planned that way. Detective Sarah Iqbal sat in the dim evidence room, the small voice recorder lying on the table like a ticking clock. Around her, the hum of ceiling lights filled the silence. She pressed play, a hiss of static. Then voices. "Saad Qureshi, it's all set for tonight. He won't suspect anything." Unknown male voice. Make sure she plays her part. She needs to look scared, believable. Saad, and after the wedding. Unknown male, leave that to me. Sarah leaned forward, eyes narrowing. The second voice wasn't Rayon's. It wasn't Saad's either. It was calm, calculated, and hauntingly familiar. She replayed the clip, focusing on the tone, the rhythm of speech. Then it hit her, Adil Malik. Her pulse quickened. She called Inspector Navid immediately. I've got confirmation. Adil was working with Saad. This wasn't a love affair. It was a setup. Navid's voice crackled through the speaker. So Aisha wasn't cheating. Not in the way Rayan thought. They manipulated her. Probably blackmailed her into meeting Saad before the wedding. Then leaked those messages to Rayan, knowing exactly how he'd react. Sarah's mind raced ahead, piecing it all together. Adil had motive, money, and control. He knew Rayan's emotions were volatile. He didn't need to kill anyone himself. He just needed to push the right buttons. At the same time, Rayan sat in his cell, clutching a photo of Aisha the police had returned to him. She was scared that night, he whispered. I saw it in her eyes. He didn't know it yet, but those words were about to save him. Sarah arrived at the Malik estate later that evening, her footsteps echoing through the marble hallway. Adil greeted her with his usual confident smile. Detective, back again. She returned the smile, thin and sharp. Just one last question, she said. You were close to Saad Qureshi. Care to tell me what business you two shared? Adil shrugged. None, really. Just wedding logistics. Sarah nodded slowly, then placed the recorder on the table. She pressed play. The color drained from Adil's face as his own voice filled the room. The calm mask cracked, replaced by something cold and furious. You've got nothing, he hissed. Oh, I've got plenty, Sarah replied. You set your cousin up to believe his wife betrayed him. You made sure Saad delivered the evidence. And when it all went wrong, you disappeared him too, didn't you? He didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence was louder than words. Sarah leaned in closer. This wasn't just revenge or jealousy, Adil. You wanted his company, his name, his life. But you forgot one thing. The truth always records itself somewhere. Outside, officers moved in, the sound of handcuffs echoing faintly down the corridor. For the first time, Rayan Malik would sleep without guilt, though not without grief. His world had still collapsed, but at least now he knew who had built the trap that destroyed it. Later, Sarah watched the city lights from her car, her reflection faint in the window. Another case closed, but not without scars. In love and crime, she whispered, the truth always hides in plain sight. Rain poured over Karachi, washing the streets in silver streaks. Inside the police headquarters, the air was heavy with the smell of wet paper and tension. Adil Malik sat across from Detective Sarah Iqbal, hands cuffed, eyes fixed on the floor. Hours had passed since his arrest, yet he hadn't spoken a word. Sarah watched him quietly, her patience a weapon sharper than any threat. Adil, she began calmly, we've got your voice on the recorder. We've traced your bank accounts to large transfers from an offshore firm tied to Saad Qureshi's business. This wasn't personal. It was planned. He finally looked up, his expression cold. You think you know everything, detective. You don't even know who hired us. Sarah's pen stopped mid. Hired you. Adil gave a faint, bitter smile. You really believe Saad and I were smart enough to pull this off alone? The room seemed to shrink. Who hired you? Sarah pressed. Adil leaned back in his chair. I'll talk, but I want a deal. Sarah exchanged a glance with her partner, Naveed. That depends on what you have to offer. Adil's smile widened. Evidence that clears Rayan completely, and proof that the real mastermind is still out there. He took a deep breath, his tone shifting. Saad and I were approached 6 months ago by a man who wanted Rayan's company to collapse. Said he'd pay us enough to disappear after it was done. All we had to do was create a scandal, something emotional, public, irreversible. So we used Ayesha. She was vulnerable, easy to manipulate. Sarah's stomach turned. And this man, what was his name? Adil hesitated, then whispered, Khalid Rahman. Sarah froze. Khalid Rahman, Rayan's business rival, a name she'd seen in the background of financial reports, but never tied to the case. You're saying Rahman orchestrated this entire thing? Adil nodded. He wanted Rayan's company shares to drop his name destroyed. Once the scandal hit the media, he'd buy the remaining shares through a dummy firm. We were just the tools. Sarah rose slowly from her chair. Where's Saad now? Adil's face hardened. Gone. Rahman made sure of it. When things went wrong, Saad became a liability. I was supposed to disappear too. The truth settled like a storm cloud. The crime wasn't just about betrayal or jealousy. It was corporate warfare, disguised as love gone wrong. Rayan hadn't lost just his wife. He'd lost his entire world to someone's greed. Sarah left the room, her mind spinning. She walked down the corridor, phone already to her ear. Get me everything on Khalid Rahman, his properties, his flights, his offshore accounts. If Adil's telling the truth, this goes much higher than we thought. Outside, the rain kept falling, washing the city clean while the truth, finally uncovered, stained everything it touched. Back in the interrogation room, Adiel whispered to himself, he thinks he's untouchable. But everyone leaves a trail. And somewhere, in a glass tower overlooking the city, Khalid Rahman watched the news coverage of Rayan's arrest, a thin smile forming on his lips, unaware that his turn was coming next. 3 days later, Karachi's skyline shimmered beneath a pale morning haze. Detective Sarah Iqbal stood on the rooftop of the anti-corruption unit's headquarters, her phone pressed to her ear. Yes, she said, her tone clipped. He's back in the country. Khalid Rahman just landed from Dubai on a private jet. This is our chance. Downstairs, officers prepared the sting operation documents, warrants, and surveillance feeds, all in motion. The case that had begun as a tragic wedding murder was about to end as one of the biggest white-collar takedowns the city had ever seen. Sarah moved fast. By noon, her team was parked across from Raman Holdings, the glass tower where the man himself sat in his office, sipping coffee like nothing could touch him. On his desk, newspapers still showed Rayan Malik's face, headlines screaming billionaire's bride dead, cousin confesses. Rahman smiled at the chaos he had created, but his smile faded when the door burst open. Mr. Khalid Rahman, Sarah announced, badge held high. You're under arrest for conspiracy, blackmail, and obstruction of justice. Rahman leaned back, unbothered. Detective, you've made a mistake, he said smoothly. You have no proof. Sarah dropped a folder on his desk. Actually, we have your bank transfers. the offshore accounts tied to Adil Malik, and voice recordings where you gave the order. We also have a survivor willing to testify, Saad Qureshi. Rahman's expression cracked for the first time. That's impossible. He's dead. Sarah's eyes hardened. He thought you might say that. So he came to us last night. Rahman's composure vanished. The empire he'd built on manipulation was collapsing in front of him. Officers moved in, cuffing him as Sarah turned away. You destroyed lives for greed, she said quietly. Now you'll watch your own crumble. Hours later, Rayan Malik sat in Sarah's office, silent as she handed him a file. Inside were the final reports, Adil's confession, Saad's statement, and proof that Aisha had been blackmailed. She wasn't unfaithful. She had been trapped. Rayan stared at her photo, his voice breaking. She tried to tell me, but I didn't listen. Sarah nodded gently. You were never the villain in this story, Mr. Malik. You were the target. He looked out the window, watching the sun sink over the city. What happens now? Justice, Sarah replied. Slow, but certain. Rayan stood, adjusting the ring that still clung to his finger. Then maybe I'll finally sleep. Sarah watched him leave, the weight of the case lifting, though only slightly. In her line of work, there were never happy endings, only truths, and the people strong enough to face them. That night, as rain began to fall again, Sarah stood by her window, the city lights flickering below. She pressed play on the recorder one last time, listening to the voices that had started it all. Then she switched it off and whispered to herself, case closed.